Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So, today I want to talk to you about the Philosophy 24/7 podcast. David Edmonds interviews Michael Hannon, who's a young American scholar living in the UK. And Hannon's research concerns political disagreement. Uh, as is noted in the liner notes to the episode, we live in divisive political times. Of course, there's always been political disagreement, but in the past, division seemed easier to understand. Two people might disagree on values. For example, one person placing more emphasis than the other on equality rather than liberty. What's so disturbing about current politics is that the opposing sides seem to disagree about very basic facts. Indeed, many people seem to believe things which are just patently untrue. So, what's going on? So, the example that Hannon gives. He talks about the infamous Trump inauguration photo in which Trump's crowd is clearly less than was Obama's in '08. And yet, nevertheless, if you show that photo to a partisan Trump supporter, they will adamantly insist that no, Trump's crowd is bigger. So this is this has led to a theory known as partisan cheerleading, or something to that effect. I don't remember the exact name of the theory, but the idea is that uh, people are so biased today, currently, in their political belief structures that they will deny basic empirical reality to uh, to simply be in opposition with the opposing side. Um, Now, what's interesting is there are studies that suggest if you give financial incentive to tell the truth, people will abandon their political commitments and actually tell the truth about what's going on. But Hannon chalks this phenomenon up to, again, just partisan cheerleading, right? Well, my side, even though he believes people know, for example, that in the case of the Trump inauguration crowd, that the answer they're giving is clearly mistaken. But he stops there. He thinks, that this is just, they acknowledge that, they'll acknowledge under, again, financial incentive or, perhaps a neutral ground that, yeah, I don't really believe this. I'm just, uh, trying to own the liberals or whatever the case may be. And it's not just Republicans that do this or conservatives by any means. Both sides of the political spectrum do this. But what Hannon, does not do, and I find this bizarre, he doesn't go deeper than that. He doesn't try to understand why it is the case, if it is in fact the case, that we're more hyperpartisan and more inclined to support our political side and cheerlead for our political favorites uh, now than we would be than we were in the past. Why, if it is the case that people are more inclined to do this, that they're more inclined to do this than they were, say, 30, 40 years ago? Well, there are there are objective studies uh, that that shed some light on this. For example, this is not widely known in the United States, but 32, 33 years ago, a law was repealed in the United States during the end of the Reagan administration, which expressly forbade having a partisan radio station or a partisan network. In other words, under federal law, prior to the end of the Reagan administration, you had to give, if you were going to broadcast political content on your channel, your radio station, your television station, what have you, you had to give equal time to both sides or all sides of the uh, mainstream. Mind you, nobody had to give, you weren't under any obligation to give, you know, airtime to Nazis, right? But left or right, you had to give equal time to the perspective. Well, this law was repealed, and Not long after that, you get the phenomenon of AM talk radio, in which Rush Limbaugh rises to power. You also start to get these hyper partisan 24-hour news stations, right? You get MSNBC on the left, albeit much later, but you get Fox News. I think Fox News went in business around 90 or 98, 99. So it's no coincidence you start to get these hyper partisan views, and of course another phenomenon, another factor in all of this, obviously, is the internet. It is very easy to find positions that reinforce your biases, and this is a phenomenon that's well known in psychology. It's called confirmation bias, and what it means. Confirmation bias is a cognitive bias. Cognitive biases are unconscious psychological tendencies that all human beings have. Our our cognitive biases skew, alter, or disrupt rational belief formation. All human beings are subjected to these. Now, we can combat them in a number of ways, right? But the most important thing to do is to be aware that you're under the effect of a cognitive bias in the first place. And one of the most pernicious of the cognitive biases is, again, as I said, confirmation bias, in which we seek out only those sources of information that are going to confirm what we're already inclined to believe. As a good critical thinker, you got to do better than that. And what do you mean by do better than that? You have a moral obligation, I would argue, to seek out sources of information that run counter to what you are inclined to believe. And then you must take those sources of information and filter them through your critical thinking abilities, your critical thinking skills, and try to come to as an objective position on an issue, any given issue, as you possibly can. This is difficult for humans. We're hardwired because of the cognitive biases to think in terms of tribe. We put it this way: modern anthropological research and psychological research suggests that one of the reasons why modern humans experience such acute levels of stress is because we're trying to navigate a highly technological and complex world with a brain that evolved to deal with situations on the savannah of Africa, East Africa, 100,000, 150,000 years ago, when modern humans finally, evolved on the scene. Um, Things have changed, obviously, significantly, right? Uh, but our cognitive biases are still there. It takes concerted, dedicated effort to overcome these, right? So remember, when you see these hyper partisan debates and people are simply denying facts, right? Remember the effects of the cognitive biases, and in this case, particularly confirmation bias. And one last bit about this: when you feel yourself becoming depressed or down about the political situation, if you feel like it's getting you down, you just don't want to deal with it. Remember that you are now operating under another cognitive bias. That's negativity bias. Negativity bias is the tendency that human beings have to place more emphasis on bad news than on good news. So being cognizant of that and being aware that this is exactly what's happening is a very effective way to counter it.